Okay, welcome everybody. We are approaching the final phase of the project, and then so today is the last week I'm around, and from next week on there will be Rüdiger Ubanke again, and he will teach you about the very important topic of neural networks and deep learning, which is a very interesting class of models I'm sure you're interested to learn about, and we can use the very same principles that we have learned in the first part of the course already, like overfitting, like the generalization, and all these things. So deep learning is just another regression model, if you like, and that's going to be the topic from last week on. Also today will be a little bit shorter because we want to give you enough time for the projects. So, by the way, sorry that in the QA session today at 2 there were not enough assistants. They only arrived later. So if you have more questions, I'll be around here after the course, and also the TAs are always on Moodle and in the regular exercise as well. I hope it's going fine. So if there is troubles with your particular data set from a lab, then reach out to us so we can help. Otherwise, then we are looking forward to these amazing interdisciplinary projects and also the regular projects by end of this year. Yeah. Any logistic questions we need to discuss? Okay, so the plan for today is to wrap up about the SVD and the principal component analysis. So this is a very useful concept to do dimensionality reduction. So if you have many features, you're given a data set, it's not easy for you to get started, to even visualize how does this data set look like, what is the main thing happening in the data, what are the outliers, what are the usual data points in your data set. And there PCA is a very good method to visualize your data. So you have 100 features, nobody can visualize a 100-dimensional space, but you can now project it down to 2 dimensions and then have your data set as points in 2D, which is very useful. So we saw this a bit here when we show the data set which you obtain when you do PCA with 2 dimensions from these faces here. So that was the original data set on the left, had 250 features for each point. We managed to project them down to 2. So the projection is this purple component C, which means compressed, on the upper right. That's the compression which brings you down to 2 dimensions. So in our case, so here these points, if you apply this compression to your data point xn, then you get something 2-dimensional, right? And what is it? It's exactly the first 2 columns of your U matrix, and that is multiplied with your data. So you would take the whole X matrix here, but let's say if you only do it for 1 data point, then that's just applying it to the xn, right? Xn is 250 dimensions, and then just using the first 2 columns of your SVD, the 2 columns, therefore the U transpose has 2 rows, therefore the result of this has just 2 entries, and this is the compressed version. This is, what is it? It's quite clear. It's so the 2 vectors you have chosen, they are your new bases. So you have chosen two basis directions, and you ask, in the new basis, what are my coordinates of the original point? And that is very easy. You just project your data point onto the first basis vector. That's what the first line of this expression does. And then you project the same data point on the second basis vector. That's what the column U2 times your data xn will be. So that's your new coordinate. Just a coordinate transform from the old coordinates to the new coordinates. So if you would do this from 250 to 250, then this would be basis, right? But we just do it for the first k, therefore it's not really a basis, but the two vectors are orthogonal, so if you go further, it would form a basis. And then you can visualize it very nicely, and then you can also go back to 250 dimensions if you would multiply with UK again. Then you get the decompression of the compressed version. There is a little animation here I have. So yeah, here on the left you see a data set in 3 dimensions. So this is your original data set. You can see it's a bit hard to visualize because there are too many dimensions. So you have these data points. There are no labels because we do unsupervised learning. Now we want to do PCA on these 3 dimensions. What does it do? So it's actually just to find a rotation. Now finding 2 directions in my original space where my data is explained the best. And these 2 directions, these are the red and green arrows. So I'm trying to find good red and green arrows so that my data is appearing nicely in the new basis in these 2 directions. So this, like now, I have a bad choice because the data is very clustered and not spread out. Now if I rotate, I mean I can choose these 2 vectors. So the red arrow is my U1 and the green arrow is my U2. Rotating them into my data such that it explains my data well. What does it mean? Maybe this is a good choice because now the data is kind of spread out. What I see on the right. So now the data is showing the maximum variance. That's the idea. We will make this precise in a second. And now I press the Show PCA button. That's actually what PCA would do. These are the 2 directions which you get by PCA. You can see the red direction is the first one. So that one is chosen where my data has the highest variance. And then green is my second direction, which has the second highest variance. You can see that there are kind of 3 clusters in your data, and now even people in 2 dimensions can observe that. It helps to understand your data. It helps you to see if there are outliers, if the majority is similar to each other, or how your data looks like. So that's what PCA does. And here you see the original features. You had 3 original features, then on the top row, this is original. I don't think I can write on this, no. So top row is the data as it's given to you. The 3 features are all very clustered, well, all overlapping, not clearly separated. It's not clear what I mean. And now if you go to the lower part, so these 3 lines, they are the coordinates of your points in the new dimension, in the new axis, the new coordinate system. You can see the first one is along the first principal component, and now my data points are grouped into 3 parts, so we can see better the structure in the data. And the second one is very localized, very compressed. That means there's no much variance in the data in the green direction. And there's even less variance in the blue direction, which is nice. So you found the red direction already explains most of the variance. How much that is, that's exactly this value sigma, or sigma square, that we discussed about. So that each of those is the variance. How much of it is explained by the corresponding direction. So just a little visualization. Okay. Yeah, I hope I'm still recording. That's just a recap, and this is important to remember, but if you remember how to do base changes from linear algebra, then you're already good with this. Then we discussed matrix factorization. That was easy, so because the SVD was given like that, it's clear that it is a matrix factorization by looking at it. So either you group this and this, or you group it otherwise, so then you can find your X written as a product of 2 matrices. And this also holds for the truncated SVD. So when we not do it for all the case, so this would be the full S, right? So here S is a full matrix d by n. So, but it's also true if you just take the first k entries of your diagonal. Yes, that's it. Still from last time. Now we are up to date. So this is where we have actually stopped last time. So when we said that it's very important that you only do this for the first k values, the first k singular vectors, and that was the definition of the truncated SVD. And what's important from here to take away is that if you do this, then of course you get a rank k matrix, because S here only has k non-zeros on the diagonal, everything else is 0. So S is a rank k matrix, so also the whole thing is a rank k matrix. So you found a rank k approximation to your X. Is it a good one? Yes, it's actually the best one you can get, as we have shown last time in our approximation lemma here, showing that the one you get from the SVD is the best one among any rank k approximation. So that's good. Therefore, so we have a proof that we actually have the best approximation, not only like in the video I showed you, so it's not just tuning around, but it's mathematically provable that this is the best basis if you only choose k dimensions. If you have to find a k-dimensional basis. And yeah, of course, the truncated SVD is also a matrix factorization for the same reason, even if this is only the top. So here is the red picture. This is the SK matrix. Only keep the top k entries. Then, of course, this thing is also a matrix factorization. More interestingly, it's one of this form here. It's a factorization where we only use k latent features. So that's the interesting bit, right? Just that it's factorization is already clear from here, but the interesting thing is that k values are enough, and that's the nice thing about it. Let's make sure we understand this again. So UK times this SK matrix, that will only select the first k columns from U. So you could actually write U here or UK, it's the same. And this SK, so that's what SK does to the left, but the SK does the same thing to the right, because it's like an identity matrix basically. What it does to the right is it selects the first k columns of V transpose, sorry, the first k columns of V, and therefore that's the factorization you get. So the first matrix is actually UK, that's what's written here. So this is UK, and the second matrix is Z transpose. What is that? It's just it's actually VK, but it's multiplied. Each column is multiplied with a scaling, because you have to either have your S scaling into the U or into the Z into the V part. Okay. The truncated SVD is a rank k matrix factorization. This is very nice, and therefore it brings us very close to what we had with k-means. And so this is how this is all related. Whereas in k-means we had an additional constraint on it. We had the constraint that one of the matrices had to be 0, 1, and the assignment matrix. We don't have this here. Here there's more freedom. These matrices can be anything you like, but they will have k columns in our case here. And also what we discussed before with the matrix factorization, sometimes we had different loss functions, right? We looked at for example, we only had a loss on the observed entries, not on all the entries of the X. When we did, for example, matrix completion, that was a bit different. So the special case here is that the loss function goes over all entries. So here you could say, well, we haven't formalized what is the loss function, but you could write the loss function of W and Z, and it's actually f of, it only depends on their product, right? So that just means, yes, it's one of our matrix factorization problems. What is it here? It's actually the number of entries in our matrix, and then so it's just the average. Yeah, or forget about the normalization. We can just say it's the sum of all the entries n in N and D in D. And it's again the squared loss. You're trying to approximate x with this thing. So that's almost the same we had for matrix completion, but there we only summed up over the known entries, and here we sum up over all entries. What's the pros and cons? Well, the good thing here is that this now has a closed form solution. I just showed you it's a singular value decomposition that gives you the best solution to this problem. So, which we actually have kind of proved here by saying that the SVD gives the best rank K approximation. That's actually the same thing as saying that this expression on the bottom row is minimized, right? The approximation is the best. This is very nice, but if you want a different algorithm to solve this, you could also use our standard algorithm if you like. You could just run stochastic gradient descent on this if you don't want to call a linear algebra solver. So there are two possibilities, and it's actually a good idea to run SVD. It will probably be quite competitive to the linear algebra solvers. Or sorry, I switched the app, but okay. Okay, so SVD is about all the entries, complete data matrix, and then what we also had before was a bit more general, because then we could think of some individual entries. Any questions on this thing? How to relate this to matrix factorizations and what algorithms to solve it? So there are two algorithms, right? So as we said, you can just do the SVD. That's kind of an algorithm. So you call it truncated at K, or you can do SGD. So it's a bit hard to keep this apart, right? But this you could also do if you want directly on these two matrices W and Z if you want. So that's also what we saw before. But the SVD is probably better because then you don't need to do many steps, but you just call it once. It gives you eigenvectors, singular vectors. By the way, they are kind of equivalent. It gives you these of a good quality, so therefore you don't have to worry about has it converged or not. So, okay, the last thing we want to discuss on this today is that it's also a very natural thing to do if you think probabilistically about your data. That means if you say that my data comes from a distribution from nature and every data point comes from the same distribution. So I can get as many data points as I like, and then let's look at my data. Let's look at how my data is correlated, how the features are correlated. And then we're going to see that what the SVD does is actually it kind of constructs new features. This we already know. But the good thing is that the new features it constructs are completely decorrelated, which intuitively you can already relate to. You can think that probably that's because it was orthogonal. The new directions were orthogonal when we did this, right? But now we're going to see what this really has to do with a correlation of many data points, correlation between their features. So that's the goal, and this is not so hard. So again, assume we have a ton of data points. So these are the data is again in our X matrix, and the data point is a column in our X matrix here. So this is xn, my data point. It lives in D dimensions as usual. So that's my X matrix. Now I want to preprocess my data to be normalized. That's very important also in many practical applications. So it can be a big problem if some of your features are shifted very much, or they are maybe gigantic and others are very tiny in magnitude. So it's very problematic if your features are not on the same scale. So how can you normalize your data? So it sounds trivial, but there are actually there are maybe at least 2-3 different ways to do it. But I claim this is by far the most natural way to normalize your data. So how does it work? So you just do it separately for each feature. And what it does is I want each of my features, I want it to have 0 mean over the whole data set. And I want it to have variance 1, but that will come later. Let's just think about the mean at the moment. So I'm talking about a shift now. If all the features of you are around between 9 and 11, that's not what you want, right? You want the features to be centered around 0. So you have D of these features. Let's look at one of them separately. So what's the average value of my feature, the first feature? So that's the feature D. I would look at, I would just sum up this feature over all my data points from the average. Feature D, average of all my data points, that's what I wrote here. That's the D's entry of the X bar vector. So what is X bar? It's very trivial. It's averaging all the columns of the X matrix, the green columns, right? But don't say that here we're averaging data points. That's not the right way to think of it. So it's much more clear if you say that each feature, which is a row of my X, each feature has been normalized. So because from each feature, for each row, I have subtracted xd. So from each row, I have subtracted, well, the average entry of that row. So that's what feature normalization does. Okay, yeah, maybe I'm talking too much about this easy thing, but it's very important to do normalization properly, and it would be wrong to do it the other way around, to do it over data points. That's something you should always do whatever data set you have. Make sure it's centered at first, and it's much easier to deal with it. And if we have this, then our new data set is this one, with X bar subtracted. And so these are basically the points here. These are the centered data points. So this is your original data point was xn, and now I have the centered one. I don't know, I can call it xn tilde if you want, or we don't need to give it a name. But this is the center data point. So now what you can do when you have this, now you can look at correlations between features. And what we have here is just a vector. So let me do this here. So here is my one data point, has D features, and then I multiply it with itself. So this is a vector with itself. You think it's the usual thing, right? So yeah, we have seen inner products of vectors a million times. It's funny, this is different. This is not the inner product. This is the outer product. So this is completely different. This expression here, the two brackets, they are not a number. They are a matrix. So why? Because you multiply the two vectors this way. So pick any pair n and d. Pick any pair ij of what you want. So what's the entry of this matrix? It's the i's entry of first vector times j's entry of the other vector. So that's the outer product. So this is a rank 1 matrix. Does that make sense? So, just reminding you to, always be careful where the transposers are. So here we're talking about one data point, how is it correlated with itself? That's not a number, that's a matrix. Because how is the data point correlated itself? That's how is feature number 1 correlated with feature number 7 and all the pairs of features, right? So you have 250 features, and so now we have 250 values squared on who is correlated with whom. So we're talking about features. So this is a D by D rank 1 matrix. So, okay, and we have one of those for each data point, and now we just average them over all data points. A lot of matrices, so, and that's what the matrix K is, and this is called the covariance matrix. So the sample mean is what we have here, and then K is this matrix. So the sample mean is a D vector, and the covariance matrix is a D by D matrix. Okay, this keeps track how your features correlated. It's going to be interesting, right? So if the features are independent of each other, then you will have like a 0 in there. That's because if that feature, not with itself, but that feature with that other feature, if they have nothing to do with each other and their mean is 0, then that's what it means to be independent. So that, the product of these two is going to be 0 on average. That's what it would mean to be not correlated, and let's just interpret this covariance matrix of one data point. Then because we actually average this over all the points we have observed, it's called a sample covariance matrix. And now you can talk about this matrix depending how much data you have. So if you have few data, it's probably going to be noisy. By the way, it's like gigantic matrix. It's very big. You can often not even store this matrix. But we still want to talk about it, what this matrix means. Usually we don't need to compute it. So it's very big, but it's also very important to describe how our features are correlated. And it's very useful. And now when we increase the data set size, then this matrix will be more accurate, and then it will converge to the true covariance. What is that? That's just the expectation over infinite data. Because my data comes from this source, that's my data distribution. I can ask my oracle to give me as much data as I want. It will give me data points forever. If I do this infinitely many times, then I would converge to what's called the true covariance matrix. And of course, the x bar here will converge to the true mean of all your data. Okay, but because we only have n, it's called the sample covariance matrix. So what can we do with that? And what does the SVD have to do with it? That's what we're going to see. So now we want to see if we do PCA, right? If we change our basis, then what happens to this covariance matrix? Is our new features, are they still going to be correlating with each other or not? So because for now the K matrix is everywhere non-zero. So it's a dense matrix. Let's see what happens when we do PCA. Okay, so for now on, we always assume that the x's already have been centered, the data points, so that every feature has mean 0. So I talk about these are my new x's now. So I always assume that that's what it means that the data matrix is centered. So now this is my covariance matrix, because no need to write a centering anymore. Can we understand this matrix? So yes, this is possible. what also has happened here is that we not, k was defined as 1 over n, right? Now, take this to the other side. Then I have n times my covariance matrix. That's just the sum of all these data points. And now what does this mean? So this actually means, so that's the most important thing for you here. It's not hard to see that. So every data point is a column in my X. So what you have here, if you see what is this matrix product, you can see that all the outer products of columns get summed up. That's what it is to multiply two matrices. So by definition, xn is a column of X, right? By definition, what does it mean to be a matrix product? Yeah, that's what it means. Sum up all the columns, all the other products of the columns. Are you with me on this, or too fast, too slow? So, maybe both. Okay, so if you believe that the covariance matrix is this, so by the way, this is very natural. Seems very intuitive to multiply the data with itself. Just remember this is a D by D matrix. So this will appear again. So this is the covariance matrix. The normalization, if you have the n or not, that doesn't matter so much. The important thing is that it's how is your data correlated with itself. Now we just plug in the definition of the SVD. So the SVD of X, that's what we have here. And then we do it again. We ask what's the SVD of X transpose. That's also doable to compute that. This is it. Now again, be careful with transposes and things. But we said that all the columns of U are orthogonal to each other, and all the columns of V are orthogonal to each other. Let's look at the thing in the middle. We are lucky the transpose is right. So what it does is it takes columns of V and builds the inner product. So the good thing is this is the identity matrix with n dimensions. Are you with me on this, or? So this is not true, and this is true. Important to be careful here. So yeah, that's what it is. And now it's interesting. Now this thing starts to look like it's much simpler now. It almost starts to look like a 1 SVD. So it's very close to the SVD we had for X. Here we're talking about X with itself. So what it is so S is a diagonal matrix. If you multiply with itself, it's very easy. Every entry gets squared. Diagonal times diagonal. So that's why I write S squared here, which is the diagonal matrix S with entry squared. So that's. Okay, the interesting thing is here that V has completely disappeared. So now it's only a question about U. Yeah. The first, why this one is not the case. Okay, sorry. So if V is okay, if V is a square. Sorry, you're right. So this is true if V is square, but if you talk about the first few columns, then it will not be true. So because, okay, so the second one is true, that we agree all, right? Every column is orthogonal to every other column. The first one, why is it not true? Because this is a very big matrix, small, narrow matrix multiplied with a wide matrix. So this matrix here has only rank k, but it's an n by n matrix. Therefore, it cannot be the identity. So this matrix has rank smaller than n, which is its dimension. Therefore, it cannot be the identity. So that's why this doesn't work if you have rectangular matrices V. However, if they are square and also normal, so orthogonal and normal, then it's fine. So okay, so we convinced ourselves that we can express x times x transpose. We can express this using the SVD, and it's funny that it only depends on u. So this is kind of convenient because the u is exactly what we needed to get when we wanted to compute the principal components. So, and this is the same u as we had for x. So you can already see that it's probably going to be helpful if you want to compute u, then this might also be a way to compute it. But for now, we want to talk about the interpretation. What does this have to do with features being correlated? So what we have now is the correlation matrix K is this u whatever as u. So that is still a dense matrix. So it's not any structure. So we say things are still correlated. Everything is correlated with everything else. So nothing interesting has happened yet. But now the question is, what happens if we do the same thing? We ask about the correlation matrix, but after we have transformed our features, after we have done the PCA. That's the question we want to answer next. So what if you do the transformed data set? And that's what I have here. So this is like after doing PCA. What is this? So this is exactly every data point, which is column here, has been projected down to like 2 dimensions, or k dimensions. So that's what PCA does if you would have UK here. But we want to do it for arbitrary high k. So let's do it for k equal n. So because why not? If you understand all the principal components, then we will later also understand the top k ones. Anyway, so this is what we call x tilde. This is the data after I've done PCA to it. We are familiar with what that does. Now let's ask the same thing. So now I have new features, because now they are expressed in my new basis vectors uk, or u, the columns of u. That's my new basis vectors. Now in this new basis, my coordinates have changed of each point there, and that's what my new features are. Now you can ask, are my new features still correlated or not? So let's do the same thing. Now we talk about correlation matrix, covariance matrix, same thing, of the new data transformed. And so same thing again. I will ask, what is it? It's x with itself. Here's the transformed x. Yeah, so this is by the definition of PCA. That's what we just said here. So my new x is u times the old x. Okay. What we see now is that the old data matrix appears again, and it's with itself, and that's what we just had computed on the previous slide. That's this thing here. The previous slide, what does it have? It has that x with itself is what, that's here, it's u, square times u. That's what we computed. Let's plug this in. So here is what we plugged in, u s squared u. And okay. And now again we see that we have u with itself appearing, and these guys then become the identity again, because they have the right order of transposes and things. And it would not even matter because it's the entire u, it's not only the first k column. So this is identity on D, this is identity on D, therefore the result is a diagonal matrix. And now we have done what we wanted to do. So now the interesting thing is that the pattern now looks different when I look at my correlation matrix, covariance matrix. Now it has become a diagonal matrix. And this is you might not be so impressed, but this is really important because now the new features are all independent of each other. That's what it means. Because you see every correlation of new feature j with new feature I is 0 if I and j are different. So that's what it means, because all the off diagonals are 0. So that's what we have. The new features are completely uncorrelated. And that's very nice. So this might be useful because now you can, so this is also good for interpretability. If you wanna say that this feature is going to explain if the patient has cancer or not, then it's very important that you are aware if this feature is correlated with another feature, which you also have for that patient. So it's kind of important that you're not, that you are aware if your features are correlated. And that's what we managed to do here, to make them completely uncorrelated. That's another reason why you might want to use PCA if you want to have this property that data is now uncorrelated. So all the features are uncorrelated. Okay. So that's uncorrelated is because everything is 0 off diagonal. I haven't talked about the diagonal itself. Does that also have any use? And well, yes, it contains these sk values, which we already talked about. So they appeared in our lemma, how well we approximate the data when we only use k directions. So these are the variances of each direction, and they are ordered by magnitude. We agreed on that. So what we have on the diagonal captures the importance of each of the principal components. So or the variance of each of these. So yeah, because the first feature has the largest variance. So it's like in the video showed a little demo there. You could see that the first one was the one which was most spread out in the data, which explained most of how the data is scattered in the space. Okay, so that's the interpretation what PCA has to do with the data coming from a distribution, and it also is useful for you, hopefully, to understand that you need to normalize your data and that you could look at correlation between features. It's not necessarily a bad thing if some of your features are correlated, right? If you then do a classifier on top of it, the classifier still has all features available. It can figure out itself that it shouldn't use both of them too much if they have the same meaning. So in the extreme case, you could just duplicate the feature, have that available twice. Most of the classifiers don't care about that. They work exactly the same. It's fine. But then of course, these two features are extremely correlated. In this case, correlation would actually be 1 if you normalize it. So yeah, if you want independent features, then also this. If you want few features, then this is a good thing to do. This gives you independent features, and by doing it only truncated for fixed k, then you can get few features. You can get good compression, which is what we already discussed. But in practice, don't expect PCA to do any magic to improve your classifier after. It's more to improve interpretability of your features. So it's not a. It's always better, I would say, to use more data. So it doesn't make sense to reduce your features. Typically, better let the machine learning system figure that out itself. But if you care to interpret your data, look at it, then PCA is a very good idea, I would say. Okay, after the break, I have 10 more minutes on SVD. Then I have about 10 minutes on finishing unsupervised learning, and then I will give some time for the projects. I'll be around here. Let's do a 15-minute break.